Something is hiding in the woods, the cliffs, and the shadows below the earth, watching, waiting, and choosing the perfect moment to show itself. Its presence lingers where silence feels heavier and where the natural world suddenly turns cold. From people vanishing without a sound to climbers shaken by a silent figure high above the fog, in this video, you'll witness 6 chilling encounters with a creature smarter, stronger, and far more terrifying than we're ready to face. On July 6, 2025, a group of young hikers and their adult leaders moved through a quiet part of the Appalachian Trail, far from busy paths. The troop, made up of children and a few supervisors, was enjoying a warm summer day deep in the forest. They followed a narrow track that twisted between thick trees and tall grass. The children were laughing, chatting, and pointing at birds and squirrels along the way. That night before the loss, several boys told their leaders about a tall shape seen moving between trees. It stood on 2 legs and had shining eyes. Their words were brushed aside as nothing serious. The following afternoon, the troop continued their hike, walking in a line as they moved deeper into the woods. One of the boys, just 12 years old, stepped ahead. The others were only a few steps behind when a strange sound stopped them. It was not a normal noise from an animal. It was rough, low, and came from the trees on the side of the trail. Then a sharp scream tore through the air, so loud that birds flew from the trees above. Everyone ran forward, calling out, but the forest swallowed their voices. They reached a small clearing. What they saw stopped them in place. The young hiker was no longer alive. His body was torn apart in a way that looked nothing like a bear or wolf attack. Pieces of clothing hung from broken branches. The trees around the area stood tall and still, but something about the scene felt wrong. There were long marks on the dirt. Deep prints, shaped like giant feet, surrounded the place. These prints had toes and no signs of shoes or claws. The shape of the steps showed that the creature had moved upright. The path of these steps led away from the spot and into thicker brush. It looked like whatever made them had walked slowly, not rushed. On top of a fallen tree, the boy's backpack and water bottle had been placed gently side by side. Nothing else had been touched, not a branch out of place, not a single item dropped. It was as if something had arranged it on purpose. The adult leaders stood in shock, not knowing what to say or do. No growls, no movement, only the sound of wind moving the leaves above. When help arrived, they looked at the area and took pictures, but the answer they gave was a common one. They said it was a bear, though no bear tracks were found. No fur, no signs of dragging, just those large footprints in the strange, quiet air. Later, people nearby talked in whispers about the woods. They said something smart was in there, something that watched, waited, and struck without being seen. The group left the forest changed forever. Others who planned to hike that trail soon stayed away, not wanting to meet whatever had taken the boy. The scouts and leaders left the forest behind that same evening. Their hike had turned into a nightmare none of them could explain. Back at the ranger station, the story they told did not change. Officials listened and took notes, but offered a simple answer. They marked it down as an encounter with a wild animal. Papers were filed. The case was closed, but none of the boys believed it. The scene they had witnessed, the stillness in the trees, and the strange shape of the footprints told a very different story. The group was sent home quickly, away from the mountains. Parents arrived one by one to pick up their children, all holding back tears. None of the scouts smiled. They stayed silent, their faces pale, their eyes fixed on the floor. Most did not return to the outdoors for weeks. Some had nightmares for months. One boy refused to walk near trees at all. Each of them carried the memory of what happened deep in the woods, where the wind carried strange sounds and something large had moved without being seen. At the site, workers returned to clean and remove what remained. They found nothing else. No fur, no bones, no trail beyond the thick brush. The prints stopped without a trace. The backpack and water bottle were collected and handed to the family. They had no damage, no blood, just dirt and small scratches like they had been gently set down. Not a single item had been taken or torn. Everything about it felt planned. Over time, hikers began to avoid that stretch of the trail. People spoke in hushed tones about a thing that hunted alone. Some said it was part of the forest, something older than man. Others believed it came and went as it pleased, choosing when to show itself. A few told stories of glowing eyes deep in the trees. None of these tales were ever proven, but fewer people walked that part of the trail, and those who did never went alone. The parents of the boy held a small service days later. It was quiet, simple, and filled with questions. They were told it was a bear, but the mother had seen the pictures. She knew no animal acted like that. No creature made perfect prints like the ones shown. Nothing with paws would arrange items the way they had been found. Weeks passed, then months. The forest grew full again with leaves and birds, but something in that part remained untouched. Rangers noticed animals stayed away from that stretch. Birds flew around it. Squirrels skipped the trees there. The woods were alive, but that place had turned cold, as if it remembered. The troop never returned to that region. The forest, once full of learning and fun, had become something else in their minds. Something that had taken one of their own without warning. Something that watched from the shadows, stepped silently, and left behind only fear and silence. On May 14th, 2023, a skilled trail runner started her usual morning loop in the Colorado Rockies. The sun had just come up, and the air was cool. She moved through the forest with ease, following the winding path she had run many times before. At first, it felt like a normal day, but as she passed a thick patch of trees, something strange began to happen. There was a sound behind her, light at first, like steps landing on soft dirt. She slowed down, thinking it might be a deer. The noise stopped too. She picked up her pace. The sound returned, keeping up. It was never far, always just behind the trees. As she climbed a narrow hill, she looked sideways and saw movement. A large shape, tall and dark, shifted between the trunks. It never came into full view, but it moved like it was following her on purpose. Fear started to rise. She ran faster. The figure matched her speed. When she turned sharply, the trees were still. She tried to listen. A deep, slow breath reached her ears, strong and close. Her chest tightened. It did not sound like any animal she had heard before. The breathing was steady, almost like it was waiting. For the next mile, the strange feeling stayed. She would stop to catch her breath. The forest would freeze too. No birds, no wind, just quiet. Then, with each step she took again, the quiet steps behind the trees would return. They came when she moved and stopped when she did. She felt like she was never alone. At one point, the trail dipped into a narrow, shaded section. She moved fast, hoping to get back into the sunlight. Her foot hit a rock, and she stumbled for a second. In that small pause, the sound behind her rushed forward. Heavy, fast, full of strength. She could not see it clearly, only its outline. But it was huge, upright, and fast. Much too fast for a bear or elk. She reached the end of the loop but could not finish. Her hands were shaking. She turned back toward the cabin area without saying much. Friends nearby noticed her pale face. She told them she was done. Something had been out there with her. Weeks later, a lone hiker returned from the same loop and spoke about an odd sound. It had matched each of his steps. Whenever he paused, it did too. He heard breathing but saw nothing. He felt like the trees were watching him, like something large stayed just out of sight. Rangers said it was all in their minds, that they were just scared by wild thoughts. But people began to talk. Locals stopped going near that trail. They said the path now felt different, not just strange, but heavy, like something alive waited nearby, close, quiet, and always just beyond what the eye could see. After that morning, things were never the same for her. She stopped visiting that trail, even though it had once been her favorite place. Each time she thought about going back, the memory of the sounds and that large shadow returned. Her heart would beat faster just thinking about it. She could still feel that strange breath near her ear, still remember how the air had changed around her. Her friends tried to comfort her, saying the forest was just playing tricks, but she was not alone in her fear. The story of what she went through started spreading around town. Others began to speak up. A few hikers said they had felt the same. Some talked about heavy steps behind them, or large shapes between the trees that disappeared when they turned their heads. No one could prove anything, but the feeling was the same, Something was hiding, watching, moving when no one could see. The local ranger office wrote a short report. They called it nerves, maybe brought on by weather or long hours outside. They asked people to stay calm and use the trail as usual. But fewer people showed up. Week by week, the number of runners dropped. Families stopped bringing kids. Old hikers who had used the loop for years chose new paths. Even people who had not seen anything said the trail felt different. The sounds were dull. The air was still. One man who had walked there every Sunday said it now gave him a headache. Another said the trees seemed closer, like they leaned in when no one looked. Nothing had changed on the map, but something deep in the ground felt off. The trail runner stayed away from the woods. She changed her route to city parks and open fields. Whenever someone asked about that morning, she would pause. Her eyes would lose focus for a second, and then she would nod without saying much. She never tried to explain again. She believed that whatever had been there was still in the trees, maybe waiting for someone else to pass through. As summer went on, small signs kept showing up. 2 runners found thick, broken branches bent into strange shapes. A man walking his dog saw large dents in the ground, too big to belong to any known animal. One woman said the wind carried a deep sound like breathing, but no animals were near. By early fall, a large yellow sign was placed near the trail entrance. It said the path was closed for maintenance. People knew better. The warning was not for broken fences or blocked turns. It was something else, something bigger. The space beyond that sign held a silence no one wanted to hear again. What had started as a simple run had become a warning. The runner had returned, but she had not come back the same. Something old and quiet had walked beside her, and now the path it used was left alone. On February 2nd, 2021, a well-known miner from a small Siberian outpost left early in the morning to check a rarely used shaft near the frozen edge of the tundra. He had done this kind of task many times before, always alone and always careful. The wind was sharp that day, and the sky was low with thick clouds. No one expected anything unusual. But when he returned late in the day, his face looked different, and something about his body seemed wrong. He came back covered in frozen dirt. His face was bruised and pale. His hands were red and scratched. His coat was torn and both boots had deep rips. He said nothing. His eyes stayed fixed on the ground. He would not speak when others asked what had happened. If anyone moved too close, he would pull away as if afraid. He had left for a normal check, but something in that dark place had changed him completely. Later that week, 3 miners were sent to look at the shaft. They were experienced and used to hard sights, but what they found made them pause. Heavy wooden beams that held up the walls had been cracked like thin sticks. Steel carts were flipped over as if thrown by great force. Deep marks had been scratched into the rock itself, far too wide to come from any tool. The walls looked clawed by something strong and wild. Outside the shaft, the ground was still hard from the cold. There in the frozen earth were massive tracks. They formed a wide loop around the entrance, pressing deep into the soil. The size of each print was far beyond any animal known in the region. The pattern made no sense to the men. It circled, paused, turned back, and then moved off into the woods without a clear path. It looked planned, like something had studied the area and then walked away calmly. Inside, tools were scattered across the floor, but nothing looked rushed. Hammers, picks, and helmets had been placed in strange rows. A lunchbox sat upright next to a water bottle, untouched. It was as if someone had picked up the gear, looked at it, then laid it back down. Everything was cold and quiet. No blood, no fallen rocks, no sign of a fight. Just signs that something large had been there and had moved with purpose. After that day, the miner quit. He left his job and moved to a small cabin just outside the village. He stopped speaking to others and never returned to the mine. People said he sat by his window at night, watching the forest without blinking. He no longer worked or traveled. Whatever had happened in that shaft had left him with something no one could understand. And though the mine stayed open, fewer people volunteered for solo trips again. Something unseen had stepped out of the earth, and it had left one man broken. As weeks passed, the story spread quietly through the village. Some said the miner had seen a wild animal, but others thought something much older lived near that shaft. At night, faint sounds came from the forest, not loud, but enough to make people stop and listen. The wind no longer sounded the same. Dogs would grow restless and refuse to go near the trees. Those living close to the woods began locking their doors even during the day. A few months later, 2 workers were sent to retrieve old equipment from the area. They returned before sunset, empty-handed. They claimed the path felt strange, as if the air was heavier. They said the mine entrance looked darker than before, like the shadows were thicker than normal. Though they saw no creature, both agreed the place was no longer safe. One refused to return at all. No official action was taken, but quietly the site was marked as avoided. Inside the cabin, the miner kept his routine. Every morning he stood on the porch and looked out into the tree line. At night, a single candle burned in the window. He spoke only when needed, his voice flat and slow. He refused food from others and made his own from dry goods. He never smiled, never raised his voice. Something inside him had gone quiet, as if part of him stayed behind that day in the shaft. Others noticed how he walked differently. He kept his back to the walls and never turned his back to the forest. Sometimes he would whisper under his breath while staring at the horizon. His eyes always looked tired. Local children were told to stay away from him, not because he was dangerous, but because he seemed like someone who had seen too much. The old men in town called it a warning. One morning, the candle in the window stayed dark. A neighbor knocked but got no reply. When they stepped inside, the cabin was cold and quiet. The man was gone, but his coat and boots were still there. A plate of untouched food sat on the table. The chair faced the window. No sign of a struggle, no broken lock, just an open door and soft snow blown across the floor. Outside, the same wide tracks were found again, leading away from the home, curving toward the hills, then vanishing into nothing. The village held no service. People spoke about him less and less, as if silence would keep the forest still. The mine was sealed without notice, and maps were quietly redrawn to remove its location. To this day, those who work nearby avoid that stretch. Stories are still told in low voices, always ending the same way. That land was never meant to be touched. Something waits there, watching from the shadows, and when it chooses, it does not need to be seen to be remembered. On August 3, 2022, 2 friends entered a remote limestone cave system deep in the Carpathian Mountains. Both were amateur explorers who had planned for weeks to map a narrow section that few had seen before. They carried ropes, lights, and measuring tools, ready for a long journey under the earth. At first, everything seemed normal. The air was damp and the passage was tight, but they pushed forward, working as a team in the dim glow of their headlamps. Then far ahead, a strange sound echoed through the tunnel. It was deep and steady, like breathing, but louder than any person could make. They paused, unsure of what they had heard. As they listened, it came again, slow and heavy. They looked at each other, confused. No one else was inside. Then something shifted in the dark. A low rumble shook the rocks around them. Stones began to fall from above, one at a time, then faster. They had not touched anything, yet it felt like something large had started to move. The space was too narrow to run. One of them stepped backward, but before he could call out, his friend let out a sharp cry. A loud crash followed. When he turned around, the flashlight caught only dust and swinging ropes. His partner had vanished. There was no sign of where he had gone, just darkness and a strange echo that seemed to fade into silence. Panic set in. The remaining explorer dropped his gear, turned around and began crawling back toward the entrance. His hands scraped the stone as he moved faster, ignoring the pain and fear closing in around him. Behind him, something large shifted again. He did not look back. The path was longer on the return. Each step felt slower. The breathing sound returned once more, now much closer, but it stopped before reaching him. After what felt like hours, daylight appeared at the mouth of the cave. He ran out, collapsing just past the entrance. Cold air and quiet forest surrounded him, but his thoughts stayed in the shadows behind. Help arrived after a full day. Rescue workers entered the same route with safety gear and lights. They searched the area carefully. Nothing had fallen inside. The walls were unbroken with no collapse in sight. Deeper into the system, near a small pool, they found the missing body. It was clear he had not fallen. His chest had deep wounds, as if something powerful had crushed it from the front. Near the body, one item had been left behind in a strange place. His helmet had somehow been pushed into a crack high above the ground, much too high for a man to reach or throw. This made the search team nervous. One man refused to return underground again. As the sun set over the hills, one friend remained silent, refusing to explain what had really moved in the cave that day. The rescue team left the cave in silence. Nothing inside explained what had happened. The tunnel was clear. No damage showed on the walls. But one man had died, and the way his body was found made no sense. His chest had been crushed inward, not by a fall, but by something heavy and close. His helmet, stuck far above the floor, added to the confusion. The path leading to him was smooth, without signs of falling rocks. No animal tracks were seen. No tools had been moved. Only the helmet and the broken bones told a different story. The survivor stayed quiet. He had once been proud to explore dark places, but now he spent each day inside a small home at the base of the hill. People tried to speak with him, but he never answered. He stared out the window, watching the tree line. He did not eat much. He slept very little. At night, he lit a lamp and kept it burning until morning. No one knew what he saw, but his hands would shake if anyone asked about the trip. In town, rumors began to spread. Some said a beast lived deep underground. Others believed it was not an animal at all, but something older. Children were told to stay out of the woods. Even trained cavers changed their plans. The mouth of that cave was marked with signs, warning of danger. But few believed those signs told the full truth. People whispered about what the man had escaped and why his friend had not. Weeks passed, but the mystery did not fade. Experts visited, studied the area, and gave reports. They claimed it was a simple rockfall. They said the body had landed strangely. They said fear had caused the survivor to imagine things. But when they were alone, even the experts admitted the facts did not fit. How did the helmet reach so high? Why was the man found near still water, not at the base of a wall? Why were there no signs of falling stone? The survivor never returned to the world he once loved. He gave up his maps and gear. His name faded from lists of explorers. He became known not for his adventures, but for the fear in his eyes. People in the village began to avoid him. Some said he had brought bad luck. Others just felt uneasy in his presence. He lived alone, quiet and still, always facing the forest. That cave remains sealed now. The entrance is watched and no one steps inside. Those who live nearby walk faster when they pass it. They remember what happened there and how quickly one life ended. The forest seems calm, but the ground holds secrets. No one knows what waits below. One man came back, but he left something behind, something no one else dares to find. And still, the cave waits in silence, holding its truth in the dark. On the morning of August 14, 2025, a family living on a quiet patch of ranch land in Montana woke up to a mystery. The sun had barely risen when they stepped outside and saw that 12 cattle were missing from the corral. The fencing stood strong. No gate had been touched. The ground was soaked from overnight rain, but there were no tire marks or boot prints in the mud. Only one type of mark was present, strange wide dents that looked like large bare feet moving in a line from the pen toward the trees. The family's dogs, usually loud and alert, were silent. They sat in the barn, backs pressed against the walls, refusing to leave even when called. The family members exchanged worried looks. Something felt off. They searched the property all day. The missing cattle left no usual signs. There was no trail of fur or blood, no broken branches from a struggle. It was as if the animals had been lifted and carried away without a sound. That night, as the wind swept through the fields, eerie noises echoed across the land. They were not wolf howls or coyote calls. These sounds were lower, longer, almost like a mix of crying and growling. Each time the noise rose, the horses stomped nervously in their stalls. The lights in the house flickered. No one in the home slept. The next day, silence returned. Still, there were no signs of the lost herd. Not a single hoof print had been found beyond the earlier barefoot track. 2 days later, someone found one of the missing cows. It was nearly a mile from the ranch, at the edge of a thick grove of pine trees. The animal was standing against a tall trunk, leaning like it had been carefully placed there. Its eyes were wide open. Its body had no cut, no bruises, not even dirt, but the look on its face was frozen in fear. The air smelled clean, but something unseen hung heavy in the place. The family knew this was not the work of rustlers. They had lived on that land for decades. They had seen storms, bears, and even wolves pass through. but never had a whole group of animals vanish like this, without signs of struggle or noise. Officials came and walked the area. They looked at the fence, checked the trees, and asked questions. In the end, they blamed thieves or natural predators, but admitted that the facts were strange. The strange part was not just what was found, it was what was not found. No prints from truck, no claw mark, no broken bones. Only silent dogs, deep footprint, and a cow placed gently in the forest. The rest of the animals were gone, and no one could say how. The family stood by the empty corral each day, hoping for answers, but none came. Only the wind moved across the land, and the trees stood quiet, holding their secret. Days passed, but no new tracks appeared. No more sounds came through the trees, and no signs of the 11 remaining animals were found. The strange part was not only the missing herd, but also the quiet that followed. Birds stayed away. The usual buzzing of insects near the pasture stopped. Even the wind through the trees seemed soft, like it moved around something that could not be seen. The dogs never left the barn again and stayed curled up in the corners, their ears low and their eyes wide. One evening, the youngest member of the family noticed something odd. Near the far side of the corral, the wire fence was still untouched, but a row of small stones had been placed neatly in a line. They were smooth, almost polished, and shaped in a pattern that no one in the family recognized. Just beyond the stones, the grass was flattened into wide circular shape, like something very large had been standing still for a long time. None of them had placed the stones there, and the area had been checked only a day earlier. That night, the strange cries returned. This time they were softer, slower, and spaced far apart. The sound echoed across the fields and bounced off the barn walls. Inside the house, the family listened in silence. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the children knew something was not right. One of the older ranch hands quietly packed his bag and left that morning. He did not give a reason. He only said he would not return. Weeks went by. More trees near the edge of the property began to lose leaves early, even though it was still summer. Some bark had been scratched and peeled in clean, long lines higher than any animal could reach. On one of the trunks, the family found a mark carved deep, shaped like a handprint but far wider than a person's. There were no fingers, only thick, rounded tip, like blunt claws had pressed into the wood. The family had once loved that land. They had worked it for years, raising animals and growing crop. But now, the silence was too much. The fear became part of their daily life. The cattle that remained would not wander far. They stuck close to the barn and refused to graze near the trees. The family tried using trail cameras, but each time the devices were found pushed over, the batteries removed, and stacked neatly beside them. Finally, after 3 months of waiting, hoping, and fearing, they made a decision. They sold the last of their herd. They packed their tools. They locked the barn. The father placed a final note on the gatepost for the new owner, warning them never to leave animals out at night. Then they left the ranch behind, the land that had turned quiet, the woods that had once seemed safe. Whatever had taken their cattle, whatever had left no trace but fear, was still out there, watching and waiting. On August 18, 2024, 2 climbers set out to scale a tall and lonely cliff far inside the mountains of Norway. They were used to such climbs, but this route felt different. There was no wind. The air hung heavy. Every sound seemed louder than usual. Even small movements echoed against the high rock walls. The sun was hidden behind thick clouds, and the light stayed dull from the start. As they climbed upward, a strange sound broke the stillness. Small stones began to fall from the heights above them. It happened again and again in short bursts, almost like something or someone was pushing them off on purpose. The falling rocks were not part of a slide. They came too neatly spaced to be natural. Each hit the ground with a sharp crack that echoed down the cliff. Halfway up, they reached a narrow, flat spot. There, they found something very odd. A thick branch had been pushed into a deep crack in the wall. It was green, freshly broken, and placed in a way that looked careful. There were no trees growing close enough for it to have fallen there. They looked at each other, confused, but said nothing. They kept their thoughts quiet and focused on setting their ropes for the next stretch of the climb. Just as they were about to continue, one climber turned to look across a narrow gap in the rocks. There, standing very still on a ledge just beyond, was something tall and dark. It had a shape like a person, but it was much too large and wide. It did not move at all. The fog rolled around it, but the figure remained still like a statue. The climber blinked and looked again. It was still there. He tried to show his partner, but when they both looked again, the shape was gone. There had been no sound of footsteps, no shift of rock. It had vanished like it had never been there. The fog was thick again, hiding everything. They waited for a few minutes, not speaking. The air felt heavy. Even the birds had gone quiet. Trying not to panic, they climbed again. The rope felt cold in their hands. Their boots moved slowly now, their eyes always searching the edges of the cliff. When they finally reached the top hours later, the silence was even deeper than before. There was no wind in the trees and no animals in sight. Then something else appeared. On the ground ahead of them lay a row of broken sticks. Each one had been snapped and placed carefully in a straight line. The sticks led from the edge of the cliff into the trees. They were all the same size. None looked like they had fallen by accident. It looked planned. The line pointed like a path toward the forest. They felt watched. The air was colder up top, but not from the wind. Without a word, they packed quickly and picked away down the side of the mountain that avoided the route they came up. It took much longer, but they didn't stop to rest. The silence followed them all the way down. They did not speak until they reached the base. Something had been up there with them, and it had not wanted them to climb higher. The air at the base of the cliff felt thick as they stepped away from the rocks. Neither spoke as they moved through the lower path, eyes scanning the trees. Every sound now made them flinch. Even the rustling of leaves or a snapping twig in the distance made them stop. They did not turn around. Their minds were full of what they had seen and what they thought might still be watching. Once back at camp, they packed in silence. No fire was lit. No rest was taken. They moved quickly, eager to leave the place behind before dark came. The trail through the woods felt longer than before. Branches brushed their shoulders as if reaching from the sides. The sound of their steps grew louder. They heard nothing else. No birds, no wind, only the noise of their own boots on dirt. By the time they reached the road, their clothes were soaked from sweat. Even though the air was cold, their hands were shaking. They did not speak of the figure or the sticks or the quiet. They only nodded to each other and got into the car. It was a long drive back, but the forest seemed to stay close to the edge of the road. Shadows moved among the trees, but neither dared to look too long. Days later, one of them tried to tell a friend what had happened, but when he started, his voice cracked. He could not finish. The words would not come. He only said that something had been waiting up there, something that did not want to be found. He never climbed again. His gear was stored away and left untouched. He would not go near high ground again, not even for hiking. The other began to draw what he remembered. He used charcoal to sketch the rocks, the branches, and the tall shape. The lines were sharp. The figure he drew had no face, only a black space where eyes should be. He burned the drawing after one night. He said it felt wrong to keep it. He now works in cities, never far from crowds or bright lights. Some weeks later, a group of climbers took the same route. They reached the ledge without trouble, but something unsettled them too. They found sticks placed in another pattern. This time, the shapes pointed toward the cliff edge. The group returned early. One member claimed to have heard steady footsteps above them during the climb. Never stopping, never rushing, just moving in rhythm. News of the story spread in quiet circles. Locals near the area began to talk. They told of sounds on the mountains at night, footsteps on stone, and a silence that falls all at once. No one knew what lived up there, but no one dared to climb that part alone anymore. The cliff now sees fewer visitors. The trees around it have grown thicker. Even birds seem to avoid it. A new path was made for hikers far from the original site. Rangers do not speak about what was found, but they do warn travelers to stick to marked routes and never follow anything left behind. The figure was never seen again. But those who climb that face still wake up at night, remembering what it felt like to be watched by something that made no sound at all.